actually.
Well, let's come on then to Daniel Sachs. I haven't heard of this person. Who is he?
Oh yeah, absolutely. So, well, he's a very interesting character. I'm going to talk about basically global networks of money and power and how they exert their influence into national political systems, including right down to the very front line of UK politics, into Keir Starmer's inner circle of partners and advisors. And we're going to talk about this fella, Daniel Sachs, who is a Swedish businessman. And also, amongst that, a senior advisor to Chatham House, one of 7 trustees to the Open Societies Foundation, and he's also vice chair of the board there, working directly with formerly George Soros, now Alex Soros, who's taken on leadership of that organization. He's also the chairman of the Open Societies Investment Committee, so he directs all of their money, like where it goes to, what they invest in. He's a founding member of the European Council on Foreign Relations, and he's also a young global leader of the World Economic Forum. He graduated from that program in 2007. So he is a anonymous and unknown, but extremely well-connected and influential individual. He's also a director at something called Wallenberg Investments, and Marcus Wallenberg, who's the chief executive of that organization, is on the Bilderberg steering committee. So he is indirectly linked into the Bilderberg meetings, and he also runs his own foundation, the Daniel Sachs Foundation, DSF, which was founded in 2010. Now, what are they up to, right? It gets really interesting. So the foundation talks about the path towards a vital democracy being paved by a new generation empowered to reimagine a shared future. Right? So this is about democracy. It's about empowering a new type of citizen, ultimately. Yeah, and you can see the image in the background there. This is very clearly targeted towards these neo-Marxist intersectional issues around race, gender, or anything else that they can use to get traction for their ideas. Right? They talk about their mission as building new initiatives in a space that they describe as funded activism. I've not heard this term before. This has come from the Daniel Sachs Foundation. And for my money, this is essentially doing whatever it takes to progress their agenda for change across the whole of Europe, actually, and beyond that, as we'll get into. Now, they have a very structured process for doing this. Right? So they have an innovation process which starts with understanding and mapping, gathering data, doing research, looking into the situation. The second step is ideation and solution design, so coming up with a plan for what we're going to do, and then piloting that, so basically testing, learning, iterating, refining, and then once you've established a coherent and successful model, scaling it and allowing it to become independent, i.e. allowing it to stand on its own 2 feet and no longer requiring support, whether financial or otherwise, from the Daniel Sachs Foundation. And this is a very similar approach to what you would see in any innovation hub, to what you would see at Nesta, for example. They all have a variation on this type of process. This is how transformational change is distributed across the system. Now, I'll just introduce you to one more person. So this is Paul Alarcon, who is the General Secretary of the Daniel Sachs Foundation. They don't have a huge team there. It's very much money and a couple of people, and we'll get into how their activities actually play out in a moment. But just worth noting that Mr. Alarcon is also an Obama leader for Europe. He was made one in 2023. And he's also quite keen for us to know that he's Jewish, right? So he's this is from another interview that I found on YouTube. You can see the picture in the background there. The quote says, "The world was created for me," which is from the Talmud. And that is quite a striking statement, I think. And you can see also there in the background, that is a 6-pointed star, right? So he's telling us that he's Jewish. And I guess we should assume that Mr. Sachs is as well. That's a very Jewish surname. So you've got these 2 guys up in Sweden running this foundation. And then how does that actually manifest, this funded activism that they talk about? So they've got a portfolio of stuff that they do. Right. The first thing is Multitudes Foundation, and that's about providing financial support to left-wing activist groups, real kind of grassroots organizations all across Europe, particularly those led by non-natives. And I'll get into this a lot more in a moment. They have something else called Run for Office, which is basically like an exemplar of one of those left-wing activist groups in Sweden. It's a bit like MLMS, My Life, My Say, that we've been talking about over the past few months. I'm going to talk about Multitudes and Run for Office now properly, but then later in the show, I'm going to get into the more institutional side of things, looking at the Apolitical Foundation and Apolitical. Those are focused on politicians and civil servants. And we don't have time to go through all of this stuff right now. And to be honest with you, I could probably spend 2, 3, 4, 5 hours sitting here going through the activities of Mr. Sachs. But we're just going to go through the key topics right now. So let's have a little look at Multitudes. So what do they say that they do? We support people and initiatives across Europe to reimagine politics. They're focused on what they call change makers. So these are people who want to have a real disruptive influence on the systems that they're part of. This is targeted towards immigrant communities. You can see the images on the left-hand side there. These are Afro-Caribbean people. I think there's an East Asian person in the image on the right-hand side. So these are not traditional European populations, right? They're deliberately going out and seeking these communities and giving them the resources to, as they say, break through existing power structures. And this is very much about breaking the existing social structures that are in place within European societies. Sachs and Alarcon, they're both on the board, as well as, and I'm not going to go through the whole leadership team or anything, just a couple that jumped out at me. Sei Akiwowo, who I'm coming across more and more. She's a former Newham councillor in London, and she gets absolutely everywhere. She was on the Twitter Trust and Safety team for a while. She's involved with a bunch of foundations, some of which Mike's already talked about earlier on the show. And then also Gary van Gulik, who is Dutch. She's a co-founder of the Multitudes Foundation, and she's going to now tell us a little bit about what she finds so exciting about the work that they're doing.
I want to be part of co-creating the world we want to see instead of tearing down the world we have, right? So moving from just criticizing to building. And the hope that I saw was exactly what Lisa's talking about. All across Europe, because we work across Europe in all countries here, we started seeing these ideas, brilliant ideas, people who are organizing, because organizing is part of politics, right? It's all one continuum. So organizing on issues, people who are starting to run for office who normally wouldn't have. And all of them told the same story. We have ideas, but we don't have support. We don't have money. We don't have the backing. And our inspiration was, can we create a non-partisan safety net, a backbone of support, basically, to say, we have your backs. We want to try this. Let's try it together with other funders. We're going to innovate this entire space. And so that's sort of the driving force of hope that we see all across the region, actually. And so I feel very, very proud to support them from behind and to see all these new initiatives around this region pop up. And we've now funded over 13 different new initiatives that are building up in this space.
So the soundtrack made that feel really inspirational and uplifting, didn't it? But when you actually listen to what she just said, essentially they're going around Europe seeking out people who have got radical left-wing political ideas, but have got no backing or support for those ideas, right? Really crucial, because they talk about democracy a lot. And again, we talked about this earlier in this show. Everything's being done in the name of democracy, protecting democracy. But actually what they're doing is finding people who've got no democratic mandate, they've got no backing, and they're giving them money, they're giving them a network, and they're helping to elevate them in spite of that. Right? And this, to me, is a totally artificial realignment of political and social systems across the whole of Europe. She talked about 13 organizations that the Multitudes Foundation are working with. But it's also beyond that. It's global. So we can see here, this is Luminate. So Van Gulik, Gary Van Gulik, who we just listened to there, she's one of the directors at Multitudes. She's also part of this organization, which is doing a similar thing across Africa, Asia, and Latin America. So this is a truly global network seeking to effect a radical transformation of political systems. And it's not just theoretical, right? They're also hands-on. So this is Run for Office. This is the second Daniel Sachs Foundation organization I'm going to touch on before I get into the Apolitical Foundation later on in the show. And this is, as they describe it, a youth movement for social change, presented as some kind of organic thing, but actually it's been constructed by the Daniel Sachs Foundation. It's about getting people, young people, into the political system, very clearly aimed at an Afro-Caribbean audience. Yes, if you can see there, if we can get that back onto the screen, that's not a native Swede, right? That is the facial features of an African immigrant. Right? This is very clearly ideologically aligned towards immigrant communities and to being disruptive and destructive to existing social structures. And Mr. Sachs takes a very personal interest in this. And actually, recently, this is just in the past couple of weeks, he's been out in schools and in universities speaking to young individuals from these communities to get them into his political program that he's using to transform Western society. And as I said, there'll be more on this later in the show.